Right, grab a brew and listen up. This is Jack Carter, and today we need to talk about something too many people keep dancing around. What happens when women's rights, safeguarding, and cultural pressure collide in modern Britain? Let me be clear from the start. This is not a rant against ordinary Muslims, and it is not a claim that every Muslim family thinks the same way. It's about real patterns of abuse, coercion, and institutional failure that can appear in some families, some neighborhoods, and some local systems, often disguised as tradition, faith, or community sensitivity. And that matters because once abuse gets dressed up as culture, people start hesitating. They lower their voice. They say it's complicated, or they don't want to inflame tensions, or they need to be respectful. But the girl being forced into a marriage, or the woman trapped in an abusive home, doesn't get to live inside that hesitation. She lives with the consequences. So let's talk about the reality in plain English. There are women and girls in Britain who are still dealing with honor-based abuse, forced marriage, female genital mutilation, domestic control, and intense family or community pressure over what they wear, who they see, whether they can leave, and whether they can speak to authorities at all. And the important thing is this: these issues are often hidden. They do not always look like the stereotype people imagine. Sometimes it's a phone taken away. Sometimes it's an older brother controlling movement. Sometimes it's a passport being held back. Sometimes a schoolgirl suddenly disappearing from classes because the family has, quote, arrangements back home. It's 1,000 small restrictions before it becomes one huge tragedy. Forced marriage, for example, is not just a dramatic headline. It can begin with emotional pressure, threats of shame, pressure from parents, pressure from uncles and aunties, pressure from the wider community. And when the victim says no, the response can be, "You're dishonoring us, you're betraying the family, you're being selfish." That's not culture, that's coercion. FGM is another one. People sometimes speak about it as if it's some distant issue from another time or another continent. It isn't. It is illegal here. It causes lifelong physical and psychological harm, and it still shows up as a safeguarding concern in parts of the UK. That should tell you something about the scale of the challenge and the failure to confront it properly. Then there's the question of parallel systems. Sharia councils, informal religious mediation, family arbitration, call it what you want, can be used in legitimate ways for some people. But the problem comes when women are pushed into processes that do not give them the same protections, the same independence, or the same legal clarity they would expect under British law. And before anybody jumps in, yes, Britain has the right to religious freedom. Of course it does. But religious freedom is not the same thing as letting private systems override equal rights. If a woman wants a divorce, if she needs protection from abuse, if she is fighting for inheritance or custody or safety, the answer cannot be a maze of unofficial rules that leave her weaker than the man opposite her. That's the line, isn't it? One set of laws, one standard, one justice system. If that sounds basic, it's because it is basic. But basic principles need defending when people start acting as if community pressure can sit above the law. Now, let's get into the wider problem. Institutions. Schools, councils, police, health services, and social workers often know something is wrong before the public does. But they can become frightened of getting the language wrong, frightened of being accused of prejudice, frightened of headlines, frightened of community backlash. And when institutions get frightened, vulnerable women and girls pay the price. Think about that for a second. A teenager discloses something frightening. A teacher suspects a forced marriage risk. A nurse notices signs of abuse. A neighbour hears something through the wall. Those moments are where intervention happens or doesn't happen. If the system treats the danger as a cultural misunderstanding instead of a safeguarding emergency, it is already failing. And yes, that brings us to the grooming gang scandals. Because you cannot have an honest conversation about women and girls in Britain without talking about the catastrophic failure to protect them for years. Not because nobody understood abuse, but because some people were worried about the political consequences of naming it plainly. That is what makes people angry. Not just the abuse itself, horrific as it was, but the years of delay, denial, and excuse-making. When the victims were young, working class, vulnerable, and often not listened to, they were easy to ignore. When the issue became politically awkward, suddenly everyone wanted to be careful. Careful for who? Not for the girls. Never for the girls. And this is where the feminist silence becomes such a painful issue. Real feminism should be boringly simple on this point. If a woman is being controlled, threatened, assaulted, cut off, or coerced, you back her, full stop. You do not ask what fashionable framework the abuse fits into. You do not decide her safety is less urgent because the perpetrator story's awkward. But a lot of public activism has become selective. It can be loud on slogans and soft on reality, strong on language and weak on consequences. Loud about one form of patriarchy in one context, then vague, evasive, or silent when the control comes wrapped in religion, family honour, or community identity. And look, I'm not saying every activist is hypocritical. I'm not saying nobody cares. Plenty of people do care, and they work hard, often without recognition. But the public conversation has a problem when some issues are treated as untouchable because people are terrified of saying anything that sounds too blunt. Blunt is sometimes necessary. If a girl can't choose who she marries, that is not empowerment. If a woman can't leave abuse without being shamed or hunted down, that is not respect. If a child's body is harmed in the name of tradition, that is not diversity. It is abuse, and it should be met with law, services, and consequences. So, what should actually happen? First, the law has to be enforced consistently. No exceptions, no side systems, no wink and nod. Second, safeguarding needs more courage. In schools, in councils, in police work, in health services. Third, women from these communities need proper support when they speak out, because speaking out can cost them their homes, their families, and their safety. Fourth, there has to be honest public education, not demonization, education. People need to understand the signs of coercive control, forced marriage risk, FGM risk, and honour-based abuse. Families need to know what the law is. Young people need to know what rights they actually have. And institutions need to stop confusing respect with silence. Because here's the truth. If Britain believes in equal rights, then equal rights have to apply when it is difficult, not just when it is popular. That means defending women who are pressured by family, by community, by ideology, or by anyone else who thinks their rules outrank the law. And I want to say this carefully, but firmly. The answer is not panic, and it is not hatred. The answer is clarity. Clarity about law, clarity about consent, Clarity about safeguarding. Clarity about the fact that women are not props in a political argument. They are citizens, and they deserve protection like anyone else. If you are a woman who has seen this up close, or you've watched institutions look away, I want you to ask yourself one question. What would real courage from the system look like? Would it look like more reports, more reviews, or would it look like decisive action, backed by the will to actually offend the people who benefit from silence? Be honest, because that answer tells you a lot about where we are. If you want more conversations that deal with the issue honestly, subscribe to Real UK Pulse and stay with me. I'm Jack Carter, and the rights of British women should never be negotiable. I'm Jack Carter, and the rights of British women should never be negotiable.